Hi, guys. Welcome back to another Boss Mom episode. Of course, it's called The Balanced Boss Mom for the podcast this evening. And I'm your host, Erika. And today's episode is a very special one to me. And we'll be talking about babies in NICUs and navigating through the challenges that family face. And of course, we are also going to be talking about a heartwarming children's book, Waiting for Max. This book I have read with my daughter personally, and it is one phenomenal book that I have read. And me and my daughter actually was laughing and crying and all the emotions that came with it. So, of course, this story is a real life experience and follows a big sister, Louise. Is that correct? Did I pronounce it?
Louise. Yes.
And of course, she navigates her imagination to cope with her new baby brother, Max, is what the book is based on. And of course, baby brother Max was staying in the NICU, and I was very touched about it because the illustrations was phenomenal. So I'm glad that we're going to be able to explore what it's like for families to navigate the NICU experience and how the siblings can cope with that not typical situation, but it's a different situation for kids versus adults. But without further ado, I want to introduce Emily to you guys. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Erica. I'm really excited to be here. And it means a lot that you and your daughter really enjoyed reading the book too.
Yes, and I have pictures of me and her reading the book together. And I know I sent you one the other night. So
Yes. Yeah, it was wonderful.
I know she was like, "What is this?" So I told her, I said, "We got a package. We got to open together." So she was so excited to read the book because she's reading a lot of chapter books and just books overall. So we explored it, and I now have taught her what a NICU is to her in a more layman's terms to a 7-year-old. But I want you to start from the very beginning if you can kind of share a little bit about yourself from your personal experience to storytelling, so that way the listeners can hear overall.
Yeah, of course. So, hi, I'm Emily Rosen. And in my background in my career, I've been a copywriter and creative director in advertising. So I've been a writer my whole career, but I always dreamt of writing a children's book. And so I'm excited to share my first book with you and the world. And I'm a mom. I have a 6-year-old Max who this story is inspired by. And I also have a 1-year-old named Eva. And so Max was born in 2019 and he was due at the end of June.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was about 34 weeks in the middle of May 15th, my water unexpectedly broke one morning. And so my husband and I rushed to the hospital and I was told by a nurse, "You're not leaving without having your baby." This was not the plan I had. Obviously, no parent thinks this is how their first days as a parent is going to be, but this is what
Mm-hmm.
happened. And, before Max arrived, a doctor from the NICU came into my hospital room and explained to us, because Max was 6 weeks early, he
Mm-hmm.
was going to be going to the NICU after he was born. And, we don't know how long he'll stay or what things will come up, but that's what's going to happen. And so this was all like shocking to me and my husband as well. But 20 hours after we arrived at the hospital, Max was born. He was put on my chest for maybe 30 seconds and then rushed over to the NICU where my husband followed. And he spent 16 days there.
Mm-hmm.
He mostly was working on growing and learning how to eat. But he did have one heart condition come up while he was there called SVT, which basically means his heart rate would increase drastically out of
Mm-hmm.
nowhere. And so that had to be observed as well while he
Mm-hmm.
was in the NICU. But after 16 days, he was able to come home with us. But that 16-day wait was incredibly difficult. Every day we'd go to the hospital multiple times a day. We were lucky to live pretty close to the hospital where he was born.
Mm-hmm.
But I would cry multiple times a day and just, be sad leaving the hospital, walking through the lobby and seeing other parents get to take their babies home with them. And we didn't. And one thing that kind of kept me going in that time that felt like one somewhat normal new parent thing to do was to read
Mm-hmm.
books to Max. And so we read to him every day, but had trouble finding stories that really reflected our story. And so, as my dream to become a children's book author, a couple of years after Max was born, I took an online course in that and kind of learned about the different elements of putting a children's book together. And of all the ideas I thought of, the idea of writing a story about a NICU baby really rose to the top. I felt like with 1 in 10 babies going to the NICU, over 350,000 a year in the US alone, and there's not much out there for kids that are part of that experience, whether it's siblings or cousins or next door neighbor kids. And so I thought there was a real need for a book like this. So I basically channeled all the feelings I had as a mom and desperately wanting to have my son home and the weight being really unbearable, but wrote that from
Mhm.
the perspective of this big sister, Louise, who's waiting for her little brother Max to come home.
I like that. I like how you explained everything. Like I said, the book is such a heartwarming children's book. And for my
Thank
daughter
you.
to ask me, you're welcome, ask questions about what, like, mommy, what is this? And mommy, what is this? So, like, I like how we read from beginning to end, and you can feel the emotions through the book. Through each page on the ups and downs, especially with Louise asking, like, when is Max coming home? And well, Max is not coming home today. So she did a note. And I thought the note was such the cutest thing. I was like, oh, she really wants her brother home. And I'm like, is
Yeah.
he coming home now? And so for me, I like how you talked about a little bit your experience, how that inspired for you writing Waiting for Max. Were there moments when you were writing Waiting for Max that was especially emotional or like meaningful to you?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is very emotional. It's 6 years later, and the NICU really stays with you, is what I've
Hmm.
learned. I didn't realize it when I was in there with Max, but it really has been an experience that stayed with me. So as I went back to it in writing the story, of course, it felt emotional, and and then visiting it again with my editor from my publisher, who's also a NICU mom. We
Oh,
shared our
wow.
personal experiences and definitely cried together
Hmm.
on Zoom as we discussed edits to the book. And I think what's been amazing with writing this book is it's been a great tool for healing. I am a
Hmm.
creative person, I am a writer, and that's a way I express myself and my feelings in all different ways. But for this book, it was kind of a healing process to both write it and get it
Hmm.
out in the world and see how it can positively impact families that are going through what we went through. And Louise is also kind of an embodiment of that process because she's also using creativity. In her case, it's
Hmm.
drawing pictures for her brother of ways to get him home, but she uses that as well to cope and process what's going on as a kid.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I loved about the book because when me and my daughter was reading it on Saturday, she was like, "Mom, what's a NICU?" And I had to kind of explain to her that sometimes where she was born a little differently, she was born I had a fourth-degree tear with my daughter. So, and she couldn't breathe for
mhm.
about 30 minutes afterwards. So
Wow.
it was almost turning into like a NICU situation, but thankfully it didn't. But to explain to her now in a future tense of what a NICU is, because, my sister is expecting another baby. And
Mm.
I didn't want her to walk into a situation where she didn't understand, like maybe why auntie wouldn't be able to bring her baby home or whatever, whatever takes place. Hopefully, we're having a great delivery and it's going to be a peaceful for her. But I'm glad that I was able to explain that to her because the NICU can be an overwhelming situation and not everyone understands, especially families that are going through that time and even children trying to understand why the sibling isn't coming home. So,
Exactly.
and it's tough to explain that to a 7-year-old, let alone a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old to understand that. And I applaud you and your illustrator for getting stuff out here like this because it's not often talked about NICUs and what the parents go through in that NICU situation. Are there any misconceptions that people have about babies in the NICU?
Yeah, I think, my story is obviously just one. My son was born 6 weeks early and was there for 16 days, but NICU stays can look all different ways. And I think some people don't realize that. Some babies are there for a day or two, some are there for months and months, some are there because they're born early. but some are there because they're full term and have health issues come up. So there's no like one size fits all to the NICU. And I think
Mhm,
something that I hope everyone understands is that no matter where you are, how long your baby was in the NICU, why they were in the NICU, it's so difficult and every day
mhm,
feels like forever. And so I hope that while this book portrays one family's experience, it can relate to so many different families because we're all feeling similar feelings, and I hope that it can be a tool for families that especially have kids, older kids involved, whether it is an older sibling or a niece or nephew or a neighbor kid to really start that conversation. The situation's already so stressful, so to have a tool to talk to a kid about what's going on and
mhm.
have a way to explain a few of the elements of the NICU without getting too scary, and showing another kid going through it can be really helpful no matter what the specific NICU situation you're in.
And I like that it's giving a positive outlet because people think that NICUs, I think another misconception about NICUs is that it's one size fit all and it's not the case. There's different health issues for different children that may need a NICU. And one of the things I also want to raise about the awareness of NICUs is how often it stays with the sibling,
Mm.
and what can parents do to help them feel included in the NICU situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that for me as a parent in any situation, I believe in being honest with kids and telling them the truth and empowering them with knowledge because I think that really gives them the space to feel safe to ask questions and validates whatever they're feeling in the situation. That being said, I think it needs to be done in a kid friendly way. So in the book, for example, I talk about an isolette, which we refer to as a little plastic box, or
Mhm,
the feeding tube, or the monitors that track the breathing and the heart rate of the baby. Just enough information to like really include the kids, like you said, to
mhm,
know like what they're seeing in the photos of their sibling or cousin in the NICU, understand why there's monitors and wires hooked up to this baby, and also to like give them a way to cope themselves. So maybe the kid that's reading it feels included. Is like, oh, I love to draw too. I'm gonna draw my own pictures for my NICU baby. But maybe they're not into drawing, but this sparks another way to think about it. Maybe they act it out with their stuffies, or they're
mhm,
building blocks of building the NICU out of blocks, or whatever it may be. It's just a way to really include them in the process with the knowledge of what's going on
mhm.
that, makes them feel a part of it and understand it a little better.
Yeah, because I think with kids, they have such a big imagination overall. To have a book like this reflect on one, how Louise was feeling and how she wanted her brother home, and then to relate how you guys as the parents were feeling and trying to connect with
Mhm.
Louise and explain like, hey, you can draw these drawings and he'll come home. And I love the ending. I don't want to spoil it for people, but I absolutely, when I read the ending, all you could see was tears. And my daughter was like,
Oh.
Mom, why are you crying? I said, because you have to
Oh.
understand everybody. I said, remember I taught you that everybody is different? And she was like, yeah. I said, well, you see the little plastic box that's around the baby? I said, that's Max. And I said, now that Max is no longer in the plastic bin or anything, and he's coming home, he's now get to be with Luis and get to play and have a huge future. And she was like, is that
Mhm.
happy tears or sad tears? And I said, it's both. I said, it's both. Just leave
Yeah.
her alone, you know? But I was like, just
Yeah.
leave it. I was like, let me be. And so now
Yeah, I get that.
we have put it in our library so that way she understands that in life there's everybody goes through something different. You may not be able to read or write, you may be hard at learning math, but everybody is different. And so I'm glad you did write this because it also expressed another question that formed to me when I read it about what emotional challenges, um as I felt where you were challenged because you're like, okay, I can't bring my child home, as opposed to there's
Mhm.
somebody two doors down and they could probably bring their children home. What is some ways that parents can kind of I don't wanna use the word face because I feel like it's such a generic word. How what can they do during the NICU stay to kind of help with their emotions? Because I saw in the book about how you faced your emotions and you taught Louise how to do the drawings and come back home. It brought him to come back home. So what kind of emotional challenges do parents face with the NICU stay?
I mean, I think when your baby's in the NICU, you feel a lot of emotions. You obviously feel, joy when you meet your child for the first time, but you also feel disappointment and sadness that it wasn't the way you hoped it would be. You feel stressed because you don't
Mhm,
really know what's going on. Most of the parents aren't, medical professionals and fully understand all the different things happening.
mhm,
And you also don't have control over the situation, which is really hard as a parent. You want to you know, be the number one in your child's life. And of course, you are as a parent, but when they're in the NICU, it's really up to the doctors and nurses to kind of decide the best path for your baby. And you're there to advocate for your baby and be a part of every step. But it's not really in your hands as much as you'd want it to be in the first days as a parent of this child. And so some things that we did kind of cope with all that. One thing I did that's reflected in the book is one night, like coming home at 11 p.m. from the hospital, we were driving home and there's a CVS really close to where the hospital is on our way. And I like tearily said to my husband,
mhm,
can we stop and use one of those photo kiosks and print out some of the pictures we took of Max the
mm,
last few days to then put in frames and have around home until he got there. And we ended up doing that a few times while he was in the NICU, and that
mhm,
really helped me. Just having him there when he wasn't, and like any other family would have pictures printed of their new baby. And just because ours
mhm,
had wires and he wasn't in his own crib at our house, like we still wanted to do that.
mhm,
Um, and so that's actually reflected in the book. It was really important to me that even though, most people look at photos and videos on their phone nowadays, I really wanted some of the photos that Louise saw of her brother to be printed photos. And so you'll see a lot of that in the book of her looking at photos or a photo on the fridge or on her bulletin board in her room. So that's one thing I think other parents could do to help. And the other, I think, is just try to do a couple things that feel a little normal. Like, you have to eat, you don't have to eat the cafeteria food for every meal. It's okay for you to go outside and get some sun
mhm,
and go grab a bagel somewhere nearby, or in my case, it was pancakes because that's my favorite food. And like, we just went to a deli nearby and got pancakes and just little things like that to like keep a little bit of normalcy in your life and you're not
mhm,
at the hospital every second. It feels like you wanna be and you should be, but
mhm.
it's really okay to, like, take a break and get out and do something for yourself to fulfill at least your basic needs. And so those are
Yes.
2 things that I think helped us a lot.
I like that you said that to help, especially you need to get some fresh air after being in the hospital for however many nights or
Mhm.
however many days. I know sometimes you can't stay for quite some long, like quite a long time, and I know that could
Yeah.
be very, very frustrating. Really quickly, can you explain? I know we said NICU because we're using the term, but can you explain what the meaning of what NICU is for the listeners that don't might know what that can be?
Sure. And so NICU is an acronym, NICU, which stands for Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the place in the hospital where if your baby's born early or they have health problems when they're born or a variety of reasons, they go and stay in this part of the hospital that's specifically for newborns. There's also PICU, which is a pediatric intensive care unit, but the NICU for newborns specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And all the doctors and nurses there are trained specifically to deal with babies, that have just been born or were born a few days ago. And yeah, that's where Max was his first 16 days, and 1 in 10 babies are.
I know 16 days seem like a long time. I feel like it's a long, long
Yeah,
time.
it felt really long and like in the NICU, and people told me this, but I experienced it as well. Like when
Mhm,
you're there, you feel like you take a step forward towards coming home and then you take 2 steps back. So like Max was starting to eat better from his bottles rather than just the feeding tube. But then
Mhm.
he developed that heart condition I mentioned earlier, and then he needed to stay for at least 5 more days to be observed for that. And so it
Mhm.
felt super long in the scheme of NICU stays. I know there are some babies that are there for months and months and months,
Mhm.
and some babies that are there for a day or two, and it's always hard no matter what.
Yes, it is. It is very hard. And so before we wrap up things, I just have a couple more questions and then I'm out your hair for the
Yeah.
night. But
No, this
what
is great.
advice I love the conversation, I really do. What advice would you give parents? Well, we kind of touched based on it. Are there any, besides advice,
Mhm.
what would be some kind of affirmations to give to parents that are coping with this either currently or have in the past and may have to put their baby back through this all over again? Are there any affirmations that you can give to some families that are coping with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is to remember you're not alone. The NICU can feel incredibly isolating. You're in this room with no windows and fluorescent lights. And yes, there's other babies and families around, but you're kind of in your own world with your baby. But as I said, like 1 in 10 babies are there in the NICU, and that's so many parents and families that go through what you are or have gone through. Um,
Hmm.
and sometimes it's just nice to know that you're not alone. When Max was in the NICU, I got to talk to 2 friends of mine who had been through it with their kids previously, and that, like,
Hmm.
helped me immensely. Just getting to hear their experiences, to know that their babies were now home and healthy and doing great, like, that really helps, and if you can find people in your circle or friends of friends, like, definitely do that, and there's also great organizations out there that offer things like peer mentors that have parents who've been through it before that you can connect with and talk to about what's going on and hear about their experience as well.
Like that affirmation. I really do. Because not
Mhm. Mhm.
everyone everyone copes with things differently, I shall say.
Yeah.
Now, I know for my listeners, I know we talked about that there was a NICU awareness, which was last month, correct?
Yeah,
Where can
September.
we find the resources or organizations that you can recommend or you know of for families that are navigating through NICU? And also, how can we not express, how can we raise awareness for NICU experiences?
Yeah, through this experience of kind of getting the book out there, I've
Mhm.
connected with so many great organizations that are doing just that, that are a lot of times started by former NICU parents that want to help others going through it, which is really wonderful to see.
Mhm.
At hospitals themselves, a lot of times there'll be social workers and child life specialists that can help the parents, siblings going through it. So definitely, if that's not brought to your attention, ask about it at the hospital you're at. And then there's organizations, a few that I've discovered. One is called Today is a Good Day, and that's a great organization that offers care kits for NICU families and lots of other great support resources. There's an organization called Hand to Hold, and there's one called Graham's Foundation. Both of those have peer mentors, like I mentioned, that have former NICU parents that can help you through it. And honestly, if you go on Instagram and like search NICU organization or NICU
I've been
parents, you'll
doing.
find so many great resources. There's such a huge group that I discovered through this. And then in terms of driving awareness, I really like what you were saying earlier about how you read the book and we're thinking about, your sister having the baby and like if this does happen, hopefully it doesn't, she'll be ready. And I
Mhm.
really like that way of looking at it as obviously it's a tool for families that are currently going through it or have gone through it in the past, but it's also a way to just like let kids know that this happens sometimes. Just like we want books that have all sorts of diverse stories about
Mhm.
different types of people going through different experiences that we all face in the world. And so I think just talking about it, being aware that it is so prevalent, and most people I've spoken to about this book, whether it was a librarian or at a bookstore or just, someone I got connected to, everyone has
Mhm.
a connection to the NICU because it's so prevalent, whether it was yourself or your baby or your niece or your best friend's baby. And so just being aware of that and
Yeah.
making that known to everyone, I think is helpful.
I even want to bring it up to my daughter's school because she's been having a lot of those book fairs that take place.
Yeah.
And I really want to bring it to light at my daughter's school because she has such a cool school. It feels like it's a huge college campus, but it's an elementary. But
Oh, wow.
it's a really huge school. But I'm glad that I was able to express this awareness for you. I know this story and conversation reminds us that NICU families are resilient and every little miracle is worth the wait. As we are wrapping up this evening, where can listeners connect with you and learn more about your book?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at Emily Rosen Creative or on TikTok at emily.rosen.creative. And the book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, local bookstores. I'm talking to some hospital gift shops. Basically, everywhere books are sold, this book should be. And also will be in libraries across the country. So I hope you'll seek it out at a bookstore or a library. And if they don't have it, ask them to get it. But yeah, and my website is emilyrosencreative.com. So I'd love to connect with anyone that's listening, whether you're a NICU parent or not. Please feel free to reach out.
You heard her, you guys. You heard her. She got all these resources telling you. I adored the book, and I also follow her on Instagram and TikTok. Again, Emily, I want to thank you for being here and sharing your story. For friends and listeners that are listening to this conversation or even watching this today, I want to inspire you to truly share this story. It was a real life experience. It touched me and my daughter, of course, and I'm sure it's going to touch my sister and my mom when they hear about it, which helps all of us
Thank you.
navigate the NICU experience. So you guys don't forget to follow the Balanced Boss Mom wherever you stream. I just want to set a reminder for you guys that balance isn't always perfect or you have to be perfect to even balance everything out, but it does mean in this episode today to show up with love, resilience, and hope. Again, my name is Erika, the host of the Balanced Boss Mom podcast. And Emily, again, I appreciate you being on here. I want to say bye, guys, and I hope you listen to the next episode. Bye.
Thanks.